Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I need you to do something for me. This story, what you're about to hear, it's going to test everything you think you know about power, survival, and what it means to be human. So here's the deal. Stay with me until the very end. If this story grabs you, hit that like button right now. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to know who's out there listening. Because what happened in this kingdom, in those dark tunnels beneath the throne, it could happen anywhere. It could happen to anyone. Now let's get into it. The throne room of Valendris was a cathedral of stone and shadow, its vaulted ceilings lost in the smoke of 1,000 torches. Banners bearing the silver wolf sigil hung from iron chains, swaying in the cold draft that swept through the hall. The air smelled of incense, sweat, and old blood, the scent of tradition, of power passed down through generations of men who ruled with fang and fury. Kael Draven knelt at the center of it all, his head bowed, his hands resting on his thighs. He was 28 years old, broad-shouldered and scarred, his dark hair tied back from a face that had seen too many battles for someone so young. His eyes were gray, the color of winter storms, and they never stayed still for long. Even now, even in this sacred moment, they flicked toward the edges of the hall, scanning the nobles who watched him with hungry eyes. The High Chancellor, a skeletal man named Oren Veldris, stood before him holding the crown of fangs, a circlet of blackened iron twisted into the shape of wolf teeth. Oren's voice echoed through the hall, reciting the ancient words in the old tongue, words that bound kings to their kingdoms and wolves to their packs. By blood and bone, by moon and stone, you are chosen. Do you accept the burden of the throne? Kael's jaw tightened. I accept. Do you swear to protect the pack, to defend the bloodline, to uphold the purity of our kind? I swear. Oren lowered the crown toward Kael's head. The nobles leaned forward. This was the moment. This was the culmination of years of war, assassination, and ruthless ambition. Kael Draven, the orphaned son of a disgraced general, had clawed his way to the throne through sheer will and violence. He had no allies in this room, only enemies who feared him too much to strike. The crown touched his skull, and that's when it hit him. A sharp, visceral pull, like a fishhook buried deep in his chest and yanked hard. Kael gasped, his hand shooting out to steady himself. The nobles murmured. Oren froze, the crown halfway on Kael's head. Your Grace. Oren's voice was thin, uncertain. Kael couldn't answer. His wolf, the primal instinctual part of him that had saved his life a dozen times, was screaming, not in pain, in warning, in need. Something was wrong, something was dying, and it was close. He shoved the crown off his head. It clattered to the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the silent hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Oren stumbled back, his face pale. What are you? Your Grace, you cannot… Kael rose to his feet, his chest heaving. The pull was stronger now, dragging him toward the back of the throne room, toward the ancient stonework that formed the foundation of the castle. He could feel it in his bones, in his blood. Something, someone, was beneath him, buried, forgotten. Your Grace! Oren's voice was sharp now, commanding. The ceremony is not complete. You must… Something's wrong. Kael's voice was low, almost a growl. He didn't look at Oren. He was already moving, striding past the nobles who scrambled out of his way. His boots echoed on the stone floor, each step driven by an instinct he didn't understand but couldn't ignore. Guards! Oren shouted. Stop him! But the guards didn't move. They were Kael's men, soldiers who'd fought beside him in the border wars. They knew better than to get between their king and his wolf. Kael reached the back wall of the throne room, a massive slab of stone carved with the faces of long-dead kings. His hands moved over the surface, searching for something he couldn't name. The pull was so strong now it felt like his ribs were cracking. There. A seam in the stone, hidden beneath centuries of dust and grime. He dug his fingers into it and pulled. The stone groaned, shifted. Oren was shouting behind him, the nobles yelling, but Kael didn't care. He pulled harder, his muscles screaming, and the wall gave way. A door. A hidden door. Behind it, a staircase spiraled down into darkness, the air rising from below cold and foul. Kael grabbed a torch from the wall and descended without hesitation. The stairs were old, slick with moisture. The walls closed in around him, pressing tight. He could hear Orin and the others following, their voices echoing down the shaft. Your Grace, this is madness. You don't know what's down there. Kale didn't answer. He just kept moving, following the pull that grew stronger with every step. The stairs ended in a corridor, narrow, suffocating, carved from raw bedrock. The air here was wrong, stale, dead, like a tomb. He walked faster. The corridor opened into a chamber, and Kyle stopped. The room was small, circular, the walls covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly in the torchlight. In the center of the chamber, chained to the floor with iron manacles, was a woman. No, a girl. She was young, maybe 20, her body skeletal, her skin pale as bone. Her hair hung in matted tangles around her face, and her clothes were little more than rags. She lay on her side, her breathing shallow, her chest barely rising. The chains around her wrists and ankles were thick, etched with more of those glowing runes. Kale's wolf howled. Mate. The word tore through his mind, primal and absolute. His wolf had found her. His mate. Here, in this forgotten hell beneath his throne. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking. Who did this to you? Her eyes fluttered open, just for a moment. They were violet. Violet like the sky before a storm, shot through with threads of silver light. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips moved, forming a single word. Help. Then her eyes closed again. Kyle's hands moved to the chains. They were old, forged with magic he didn't understand. He pulled, twisted, his strength surging through him. The iron groaned, resisted. He growled, his wolf rising to the surface, and the chains shattered. The moment they broke, the girl gasped, her body convulsing. Light poured from her skin, brilliant, radiant, blinding. Kale shielded his eyes, his heart pounding. The light filled the chamber, pushing back the darkness, and for a moment he saw the runes on the walls flare to life, reacting to her power. Then the light faded. The girl went limp. Kale caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest. She weighed nothing. She was dying. He could feel it. Your Grace. Kale looked up. Orin stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen guards and half the council. His face was white, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. What is this place? Kale demanded. Orin didn't answer. He just stared at the girl in Kyle's arms, his lips pressed into a thin line. What is this place? Kale's voice was a roar now, echoing through the chamber. One of the council members, a woman named Underthe, head of the Bloodline Preservation Committee, stepped forward. Her expression was cold, clinical. That, she said, nodding toward the girl, is an anomaly, a corruption. She was sentenced to containment 20 years ago. She's been down here for 20 years? Kale's voice was low, dangerous. She is dangerous, Your Grace. Her kind always has been. Her kind? Kale's eyes burned. She's a child. She is a threat. Saren's voice was sharp. Her power is incompatible with the wolf bloodline. If she is allowed to live, she will destabilize everything we have built. Kale looked down at the girl in his arms. She was still breathing, but barely. Her skin was cold, her pulse weak. His wolf was silent now, but the bond was there, unbreakable, undeniable. She's my mate, Kyle said quietly. The chamber went dead silent. Orin's face went from white to red. That's impossible. My wolf knows. Kale's voice was steady, absolute. She's mine. Saren stepped forward, her hand on the hilt of the ceremonial dagger at her belt. Then you have been compromised, Your Grace, and the law is clear. The bond must be severed. Kale rose to his feet, the girl still in his arms. His eyes locked onto Saren's. Touch her, he said softly, and I'll tear your throat out. Saren froze. The guards tensed. Orin raised a hand, his face pale. Your Grace, please, be reasonable. If you claim her, the council will demand proof. The trial of the relic. You know what that means. Kyle knew. The trial of the relic was an ancient rite, a test of the mate bond performed before the entire court. If the bond was true, the sacred relic, a fragment of the first alpha's fang, would glow in the presence of both mates. If it was false, the relic would reject them. and rejection meant death. Then we'll face the trial, Kael said. Oren's eyes widened. She won't survive it. Look at her. She can barely breathe. She'll survive. Kael's voice was iron, because I won't let her die. He turned and strode out of the chamber, carrying the girl in his arms. The guards parted for him. The nobles watched in stunned silence. Oren and Saren exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. And as Kael climbed the stairs back to the throne room, his wolf stirred again, restless and watchful. Because he knew the truth now. This wasn't just about a mate. This was about something the council had been hiding, something they'd buried in the dark and hoped would die. But she hadn't died. And now, everything was about to change. Kael carried her through the throne room, past the gaping nobles and the overturned crown still lying on the floor. He didn't stop until he reached his private chambers, a suite of rooms in the highest tower, far from the prying eyes of the court. He laid her on the bed, a massive four-poster draped in furs and heavy blankets. She looked even smaller here, swallowed by the thick fabric. Her breathing was still shallow, her skin still cold. Kael called for his healer, a grizzled old woman named Mira who'd served his family before the fall. She arrived within minutes, her face grim as she examined the girl. She's malnourished, Mira said bluntly, dehydrated. Her body's been eating itself to survive. If she'd been down there another week, she'd be dead. Can you save her? Mira looked up at him, her eyes sharp. I can try. But she needs more than medicine, Your Grace. She needs a reason to live. Kael nodded. She'll have one. Mira worked through the night, forcing water and herbs down the girl's throat, wrapping her in heated blankets, cleaning the sores on her wrists where the chains had cut deep. Kael stayed by her side, refusing to leave. He watched her face, memorized the shape of her cheekbones, the curve of her jaw. She was beautiful, in a fragile, broken way. And she was his. The bond hummed between them, faint but steady. His wolf paced inside him, restless and protective. It wanted her to wake up. It wanted her to see him. Hours passed. The sun rose, painting the room in soft gold light. And finally, her eyes opened. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, her brow furrowed, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Then her gaze shifted to Kael. He leaned forward, his heart pounding. You're safe. Her lips parted. Her voice was a rasp, barely audible. Who are you? Kael Draven, he said. I'm the Alpha King, and I'm the one who found you. She blinked, processing. Her eyes, those impossible violet eyes, searched his face. You freed me, she whispered. Yes. Why? Kael hesitated. How did you explain something like this? How did you tell someone that your soul recognized them in the dark, that every instinct you had screamed that they were yours, that you would burn the world to keep them safe? Because you're my mate, he said simply. Her eyes widened. Fear flashed across her face, raw, instinctive. She tried to sit up, her body trembling. No, that's not. I know what you are, Kael said quickly. I know you're not like us, but the bond is real. My wolf knows. I know. She stared at him, her breathing ragged. Then, slowly, she shook her head. You don't understand, she whispered. If they find out you claimed me, they'll kill you. Let them try. You don't understand, her voice cracked. I'm not supposed to exist. They made that very clear. Kael's jaw tightened. Tell me what happened. Tell me why they did this to you. She looked away, her hands clutching the blankets. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was hollow. My name is Elira Voss, and I've been in that room since I was 7 years old. Elira's story came out in pieces, fractured and raw. She'd been born in a village on the northern edge of the kingdom, the daughter of farmers who worked the hard, frozen soil. She'd been a normal child, happy, curious, loved. But when she turned 7, something changed. She started glowing. At first it was subtle, a faint shimmer on her skin when she was happy or excited. Her parents thought it was a trick of the light, but then it got stronger, brighter. One night, she woke up screaming, her entire body engulfed in radiant light that filled the house and spilled out into the street. The villagers panicked. They called for the soldiers, and the soldiers called for the council. Within a week, Alira was torn from her family and brought to the capital. She never saw her parents again. They said I was dangerous, Alira said, her voice flat. That my power was incompatible with the wolf bloodline. That if I was allowed to live freely, I'd corrupt the kingdom. That's insane. Is it? Alira looked at him, her eyes hard. Your people are terrified of anything they can't control. Anything that doesn't fit into their perfect, pure bloodline. Kale couldn't argue with that. He'd seen it firsthand, the council's obsession with purity, their ruthless culling of anyone who didn't meet their standards. It was one of the reasons he'd fought so hard to take the throne. He'd wanted to change things, but he hadn't known about this. They kept me in that room for 13 years, Alira continued. They fed me just enough to keep me alive. They studied me, tested me, tried to figure out how to extract my power without killing me. Kale's hands curled into fists. Who ordered it? The council. The same people who crowned you today. Kale's blood ran cold. They told me I'd never leave, Alira said softly. That I'd die down there, forgotten. And I believed them. Until you came. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time since she'd woken up, there was something other than fear in her eyes. Why did you come? She asked. Kale didn't know how to answer that, so he just told her the truth. Because I heard you. Alira's breath caught. I didn't hear words, Kyle said. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt you, dying, and my wolf wouldn't let me ignore it. Tears welled in Alira's eyes. She looked away, blinking hard. I didn't think anyone would ever... Her voice broke. Kale reached out, his hand covering hers. She flinched, but didn't pull away. You're not alone anymore, he said quietly. I don't care what the council says. I don't care what they've done. You're mine, and I protect what's mine. Alira stared at their joined hands, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. The next morning, Kyle called a full assembly of the court. The throne room was packed, every noble and council member crammed into the hall. The air was thick with tension. Word had already spread about what Kyle had done, how he'd abandoned his own coronation, how he'd freed the prisoner beneath the castle, how he'd claimed her as his mate. Now, they wanted answers. Kyle stood before the throne, Alira at his side. She looked stronger today, thanks to Mira's care, but she was still pale, still fragile. She wore a simple dress borrowed from one of the servants, and her hair had been washed and braided. She looked like a girl, not a monster, but the nobles stared at her like she was a plague. Orin stepped forward, his face grave. Your Grace, the council has deliberated, and we have come to a decision. Kale's eyes narrowed. I don't recall asking for your decision. Orin's jaw tightened. With all due respect, Your Grace, this matter concerns the entire kingdom. The girl, her name is Alira. Orin paused. Alira Voss is a known anomaly. Her power is unstable, dangerous. The council voted to contain her for the safety of the realm. By freeing her, you have violated... I violated nothing. Kale's voice cut through the hall like a blade. You imprisoned a child without trial. You let her rot in the dark for 13 years. And you were going to let her die. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Theron stepped forward, her face cold. She was contained because her power threatened the purity of the bloodline, Theron said. If she is allowed to walk free, she will destabilize everything we have built. Then maybe what you've built should be destabilized, Kyle shot back. Gasps echoed through the hall. Orin's face went red. Your Grace, you cannot... I can. Kale's voice was steel. I'm the Alpha King, and I claim Alira Voss as my mate. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted, guards shifted uneasily. The council members conferred in furious whispers. Orin raised his hands, calling for silence. Then you leave us no choice, Orin said, his voice shaking. The council invokes the trial of the relic. If the bond is true, the relic will confirm it. If it is false... He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what happened if the relic rejected them. Kale looked at Alira. She was pale, her hands trembling. But she met his gaze and nodded. We accept, Kale said. The trial of the relic was held that night in the ancient temple beneath the castle, a place even older than the dungeons, carved from stone and magic in the days when wolves and the old powers walked the earth together. The relic itself was kept in a crystal case at the center of the temple, a shard of bone, yellowed with age, said to be a fragment of the first Alpha's fang. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light, like a heartbeat. The entire court gathered to witness. Kael and Elira stood before the relic, side by side. The rules were simple. They would each place a hand on the crystal case. If the bond was true, the relic would glow. If it was false, the relic would burn them. Orin stood at the front of the crowd, his expression grim. "Are you ready, Your Grace?" Kael nodded. He looked at Elira. "Trust me," he said softly. She swallowed hard. Then she reached out, her hand hovering over the crystal. Kael placed his hand on the case. Elira followed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the relic exploded with light. But it wasn't the soft golden glow the crowd expected. It was violet, brilliant, blinding, the same color as Elira's eyes. The light poured from the relic, filling the temple, and the crystal case shattered, the shards flying outward. The crowd screamed, scrambling back. Kael shielded Elira, pulling her close. The light swirled around them, wild and chaotic, and the relic itself, the bone fragment, began to change. It twisted, reshaped, the yellowed bone turning silver, the surface etched with new runes that glowed with violet fire. When the light finally faded, the relic had transformed completely. It was no longer a fang. It was a crown of silver and violet light, suspended in the air above them. The temple went dead silent. Orin stared, his face white. Saren's mouth hung open. The nobles gawked, their eyes wide with shock. And Kael understood. This wasn't just a mate bond. This was something the kingdom had forgotten, something the council had buried. Elira's power and the wolf bloodline weren't enemies. They were meant to be one. The crown descended slowly, settling onto Elira's head. She gasped, her eyes glowing with that same violet light. And when she looked at Kael, he saw something new in her gaze. Strength, purpose, fury. She turned to face the court, her voice ringing through the temple. "You tried to destroy me," she said, "but you failed. And now you're going to answer for what you've done." Orin stepped forward, his hand raised. "This is a trick, an illusion. The girl has corrupted the relic." "The relic doesn't lie," Kael said coldly. "You know that as well as I do." Saren drew her dagger. "Then the relic has been poisoned, and the girl must be destroyed before she infects the kingdom." She lunged. Kael moved to intercept, but Elira was faster. She raised her hand, and light poured from her palm, not wild, not chaotic, but controlled. It slammed into Saren, lifting her off her feet and hurling her back into the crowd. The dagger clattered to the floor. The nobles backed away, fear etched on their faces. Elira lowered her hand, her chest heaving. "I'm done being your victim," she said quietly. "And if you come for me again, I won't hold back." She turned and walked out of the temple, the crown of light still glowing on her head. Kael followed, his heart pounding. And behind them the court dissolved into chaos, because everything had just changed, and there was no going back. The crown of violet light dissolved the moment Elira stepped out of the temple, fading into her skin like water into sand. But the damage was done. Word spread through the castle faster than wildfire. The relic had transformed, the girl had power, and the new king had bound himself to something the council had spent decades trying to erase. Kael caught up to her in the corridor outside his chambers. She was leaning against the wall, her face pale, her hands shaking. The surge of power had cost her. He could see it in the way her shoulders sagged, the way she struggled to catch her breath. "You shouldn't have done that," she said without looking at him. "Saren will come for you now. They all will." "Let them." Kael stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I meant what I said. You're mine. And I don't abandon what's mine." Elira laughed, a bitter sound. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." She turned to face him then, her violet eyes searching his. "You know what they did to me. You know I was buried alive for 13 years. But you don't know what I am, what I'm capable of. Then show me." For a moment she just stared at him. Then she raised her hand, palm up, and light bloomed there, soft at first, then brighter, coiling around her fingers like living thread. It wasn't fire, wasn't lightning. It was something else entirely, something that felt ancient. "This is what they were afraid of," Alira said quietly. "This is why they locked me away." Kyle reached out and closed his hand over hers, the light warming his skin. "Then they're fools. Because this isn't a weapon, it's a gift." Alira's eyes widened. The light flickered, then faded. She pulled her hand back, her expression guarded. "You don't understand what you've done," she whispered. "By claiming me, you've made yourself a target. The council won't stop until one of us is dead." "Then we make sure it's not us." Before Alira could respond, the door to Kael's chambers burst open. Mira stood there, her face grim. "Your Grace, you need to see this." Kael followed Mira into his private study, Alira close behind. On the desk lay a scroll, sealed with the council's emblem, a silver wolf's head surrounded by thorns. Kael broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. It was a summons, a formal demand for a council tribunal to be held at dawn. The charges were listed in cold clinical detail: violation of containment protocols, desecration of sacred relics, endangerment of the bloodline, treason. "They're charging you?" Alira's voice was sharp. "You're the king. The council has the authority to try a sitting monarch if they believe the throne has been compromised," Mira said quietly. "It's an old law. Hasn't been invoked in 300 years. Kael set the scroll down, his jaw tight. "They're not trying me. They're trying to remove me." "And if they succeed?" Alira asked. Mira didn't answer. She didn't need to. If the council declared Kael unfit, he'd be stripped of the throne and executed, and Alira would be sent back to that room beneath the castle. Or worse. Kael looked at Alira. "How many others are there?" She blinked. "What?" "You said they studied you, tested you. That means they were looking for something, or looking for more people like you." His eyes narrowed. "How many others did they lock away?" Alira's face went pale. "I don't know. I heard voices sometimes, in the dark, but I thought I was imagining it." Kael turned to Mira. "Get me a map of the lower dungeons, every level, every sealed chamber." Mira hesitated. "Your Grace, if you go down there now, the council will see it as confirmation of their charges. They'll say, 'You're conspiring with the anomaly.'" "I don't care what they say," Kael's voice was iron. "If there are more people down there, I'm getting them out." Alira stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." "No. You need me. If they're like me, they'll be scared. They'll fight you, but they'll recognize me." Kael wanted to argue, but she was right, and the look in her eyes told him she wasn't going to back down. "Fine," he said, "but you stay close. And if things go wrong, you run." Alira's mouth curved into a faint, humorless smile. "I've spent 13 years running. I'm done." The lower dungeons were a labyrinth of stone and shadow, carved so deep into the bedrock that the air itself felt heavy, oppressive. Kael led the way, a torch in one hand and a blade in the other. Alira walked beside him, her fingers trailing along the wall, leaving faint traces of light in her wake. Behind them, two of Kael's most trusted guards followed: Gareth, a scarred veteran with a limp, and Naira, a sharp-eyed archer who'd saved Kael's life more than once. They didn't ask questions. They just followed. Mira's map had marked 6 sealed chambers in the deepest levels. The first 3 were empty, nothing but rusted chains and old bones. But the 4th chamber was different. When Kael broke the seal and shoved the door open, the smell hit him first. Rot and filth and something acrid, like burned metal. Inside, the chamber was larger than Alira's had been, with multiple sets of chains bolted to the floor, and 3 of them were occupied. 2 men and a woman, all young, all emaciated. Their skin had the same pale, translucent quality as Alira's, and when the torchlight hit them, Kael saw the faint glow beneath their flesh, dim, flickering, like dying embers. "Sweet mercy," Gareth breathed. Alira pushed past Kael, dropping to her knees beside the woman. Hey, can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were gold, shot through with threads of white light. She stared at Alira, her lips moving soundlessly. "It's okay," Alira said softly. We're getting you out. Kale moved to the nearest man, a boy barely out of his teens. His chains were newer, the runes etched into the iron still glowing faintly. Kale grabbed the chain and pulled, his muscles straining. The iron resisted, humming with magic. Nira, help me! Together, they yanked the chain free. The boy gasped, his body convulsing. Light poured from his skin, not violet like Alira's, but blue, cold and sharp. Kale staggered back, shielding his eyes. Easy, Elira called out. You're safe now. The light dimmed. The boy slumped forward, panting. Kale caught him before he fell. What's your name? Kale asked. The boy's voice was a rasp. Corvin. Corvin, can you walk? The boy nodded weakly. Kale helped him to his feet, then turned to the others. Gareth and Nira were already freeing the second man, while Elira worked on the woman's chains. By the time they'd freed all three, the prisoners were barely conscious, their bodies too weak to stand on their own. Kyle and his guards had to carry them. We need to move, Nira said, her eyes on the corridor. If the council finds out we're down here, they already know. Elira's voice was flat. She was staring at the doorway, her eyes narrowed. Kyle followed her gaze. In the shadows beyond the torchlight, he saw movement. Figures, armed and armored, spreading out to block their escape. Saren Thule stepped into the light, flanked by a dozen council enforcers. Her hand rested on the hilt of her blade, and her smile was cold. Your Grace, she said mockingly. The council was hoping you'd come to your senses, but it seems you're determined to destroy yourself. Kale set the boy down carefully, then stepped forward, positioning himself between Saren and the prisoners. Get out of my way! Or what? Saren's smile widened. You'll kill me? In front of witnesses? That would only prove the council right. You've been compromised, corrupted, and now you're freeing the very abominations we swore to contain. They're not abominations, Elira said, her voice shaking with fury. They're people you tortured and buried alive. Saren's gaze flicked to Elira, her expression contemptuous. You think you're special because the relic reacted to you? You're not. You're a parasite, and parasites must be purged. She drew her blade. Kyle's wolf surged to the surface, his eyes flashing silver. I said, get out of my way! Saren laughed. Make me, Your Grace. The enforcers moved as one, weapons drawn. Gareth and Nira stepped forward, blades raised. The corridor filled with the sound of steel scraping stone, and then Elira raised her hand. Light exploded from her palm, not a beam, not a burst, but a wave. It slammed into the enforcers, lifting them off their feet and hurling them back against the walls. Saren barely managed to dive aside, rolling to her feet with her blade still in hand. Run! Elira shouted. Kyle didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the boy, Gareth took the woman, and Nira hauled the second man over her shoulder. They ran, Elira bringing up the rear, her hands glowing as she held the enforcers at bay. The corridor twisted and turned, the walls closing in. Behind them, Kale could hear Saren screaming orders, the sound of boots on stone. They were being hunted. Where are we going? Gareth panted. The east gate, Kale said. There's a hidden passage that leads outside the castle walls. If we can reach it. They'll cut us off, Nira interrupted. The council knows every passage in this castle. Then we make a new one. Kyle skidded to a halt in front of a section of wall that looked no different from any other. He handed the boy to Gareth, then stepped forward and slammed his fist into the stone. Once. Twice. On the third hit, the wall cracked. Your Grace, what are you? Kale didn't answer. He just kept hitting, his knuckles splitting, blood streaming down his hands. The wall groaned, shifted, and then it gave way, crumbling inward to reveal a narrow shaft beyond. Go! Kale shouted. Gareth and Nira didn't hesitate. They pushed through the gap, carrying the prisoners. Elira followed, then turned back. Kyle, I'm right behind you. But he wasn't, because Saren had caught up. She stepped into the corridor, her blade gleaming in the torchlight. Her face was twisted with rage. You've doomed yourself, Draven, she hissed. And when the council is done with you, there won't be enough left to bury. Kale's eyes flashed. Then come and finish it. Saren lunged. Kyle met her head-on, his blade clashing against hers. They fought in the narrow corridor, steel ringing against steel. Saren was fast, trained, precise. But Kyle was stronger, and his wolf gave him an edge she couldn't match. He drove her back, step by step, until her shoulders hit the wall. She snarled, her blade slashing toward his throat. And Alira's hand clamped down on Saren's wrist. Light poured from Alira's palm, searing hot. Saren screamed, her blade clattering to the floor. She tried to pull away, but Alira held on, her eyes blazing. "You tortured me for 13 years, Alira said quietly. "You deserve so much worse than this." She released Saren, shoving her to the ground. Saren clutched her burned wrist, her face pale with shock and pain. Kale grabbed Alira's hand. "We need to go, now!" They ran through the shaft, the walls so narrow they had to turn sideways in places. Behind them, Saren's screams echoed, along with the sound of reinforcements flooding the corridor. The shaft opened into a cavern, a natural formation beneath the castle, its floor slick with moisture. Gareth, Naira, and the 3 prisoners were waiting, huddled near the far wall. "There's a stream," Naira said, pointing to a thin ribbon of water running along the cavern floor. "It leads outside, but it's tight. We'll have to crawl." Kale nodded. "Then we crawl." They moved as fast as they could, following the stream through the darkness. The prisoners were too weak to walk on their own, so Kyle and his guards took turns carrying them. Alira stayed close to Kyle, her light guiding the way. After what felt like hours, the stream widened and the ceiling opened up. Fresh air rushed in, cold and clean. Ahead, Kyle could see the faint glow of moonlight. They emerged into the forest outside the castle walls, their clothes soaked, their bodies exhausted. The prisoners collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. Gareth and Naira sank down beside them, their faces pale. Kale stood, scanning the tree line. They were safe. For now. Alira touched his arm. "What do we do now?" Kale looked at her, then at the 3 broken people they'd pulled from the dark. His people. His responsibility. "We go back and," he said. Alira's eyes widened. "What?" "The council is expecting me at dawn. If I don't show up, they'll declare me a traitor and send every soldier in the kingdom after us. But if I face them, if I expose what they've done in front of the entire court, we have a chance. They'll kill you." "Maybe." Kael's jaw tightened. "But they'll have to do it in the open. And if I'm going down, I'm taking them with me." Alira stared at him, her expression torn between fear and something that looked almost like hope. "You're insane," she said softly. "Probably." Kale smiled, a sharp, dangerous thing. "But I'm also right." He turned to Gareth and Naira. "Get them somewhere safe, find Mira. She'll know what to do." Gareth nodded. "And you, Your Grace?" "I'm going back to the castle." Kale looked at Alira. "We both are." They reached the castle just as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The guards at the gate recognized Kale and let them through without question, though their eyes lingered on Alira with barely concealed fear. The throne room was already packed when they arrived. Every noble, every council member, every soldier who could fit had crammed into the hall. The air was thick with tension, with the electric charge that came before a storm. Orn stood at the front, his face grave. When he saw Kyle and Alira enter, his expression darkened. "Your Grace," he said coldly, "you were summoned to stand trial, not to bring the anomaly with you." "Her name is Alira," Kyle said, his voice carrying through the hall. "And she's here because she has something to say." The nobles murmured, their eyes flicking between Kyle and Alira. Saren stood near the front, her wrist wrapped in bandages, her face twisted with fury. Orn raised his hand for silence. "The charges against you are clear, Your Grace. You have violated containment protocols. You have desecrated sacred relics. You have endangered the bloodline. How do you plead?" Kyle didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, letting Alira move to the center of the hall. She looked small there, surrounded by armed men and hostile eyes. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "You call me an anomaly," she said. "A corruption, a threat. But I'm none of those things. I'm a survivor, and I'm not alone." She raised her hand and light bloomed there. Not wild, not chaotic, but controlled. It swirled around her fingers, casting violet shadows across the hall. "For 13 years you kept me in the dark," Alira continued. "You starved me. You studied me. You told me I was too dangerous to live. But the truth is, you were afraid. afraid of what I represented, afraid that your perfect, pure bloodline wasn't as pure as you thought. The hall went silent. The relic proved it, Elira said. When the Alpha King claimed me, the relic didn't reject us. It transformed. Because our bond isn't a corruption. It's what this kingdom was supposed to be. Wolves and people like me, living together, thriving together. Saren stepped forward, her face red. Lies. The girl has poisoned the relic with her power. She's poisoned the king, and now she seeks to poison the entire kingdom. Then explain the others, Kael said. The hall erupted. What others? Orin demanded. Kael's smile was sharp. The ones you've been hiding in the lower dungeons. 3 of them. All young. All imprisoned without trial. All left to die in the dark, just like Elira. Saren's face went white. Orin's hands clenched into fists. You have no proof, Orin said. Don't I? Kael gestured toward the entrance. Bring them in. The doors swung open. Gareth and Nyra entered, supporting the 3 prisoners between them. The woman, the boy, and the second man, all pale, all glowing faintly in the torchlight. The hall exploded into chaos. Nobles shouted. Guards drew weapons. Council members conferred in furious whispers. Orin's face was ashen. Saren reached for her blade, and Elira's hand shot out, light slamming into Saren and pinning her to the floor. Enough, Elira said, her voice ringing through the hall. No more lies, no more hiding. You're going to answer for what you've done. Saren struggled against the light, her face twisted with rage. You think you've won? You think exposing us will change anything? The people will never accept you. You're a freak, and freaks belong in the dark. Elira's eyes blazed. Then maybe it's time the dark came for you. She released Saren, but the light didn't fade. It spread, filling the hall, illuminating every corner, every shadow. And in that light, the nobles saw something they'd never noticed before. The runes carved into the throne, the symbols etched into the floor, the ancient script on the walls, all of it glowing, all of it reacting to Elira's power. Because this castle, this kingdom, had been built on a foundation the council had tried to erase. A foundation where wolves and people like Elira weren't enemies. They were meant to be one. Orin staggered back, his face pale. This is impossible. No, Kael said quietly. This is the truth, and you've been running from it for centuries. He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying over the chaos. The council lied to you. They told you that people like Elira were a threat, but the real threat was always them. They've been hiding the truth, burying anyone who didn't fit their vision, and letting innocents die in the dark. And I won't let it continue. He drew his blade and pointed it at Orin. The trial is over, Kael said, and the council is guilty. The blade in Kael's hand didn't waver. The accusation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, and for 3 long heartbeats, the throne room was utterly silent. Then Orin laughed. It wasn't the nervous laughter of a guilty man caught in his lies. It was cold, calculated, the sound of someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment. Guilty, Orin repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. You stand there, a king for less than 2 days, and you dare to judge a council that has protected this kingdom for 3 centuries? Protected? Elira's voice cut through the hall. You call torture protection? We call it survival. Saren had risen to her feet, her burned wrist still cradled against her chest, but her eyes were sharp, venomous. Your kind nearly destroyed us once. We made sure it would never happen again. Kael's wolf stirred, restless. What are you talking about? Orin's smile was thin. Of course you don't know. The truth was buried long before your grandfather's time. But the council remembers. We always remember. He turned to address the crowd, his voice rising to fill the hall. 400 years ago, this kingdom was torn apart by war, not between wolves, but between wolves and them. He gestured toward Elira and the 3 prisoners huddled near the entrance. The Lumina, that's what they called themselves. Beings of light and power who believed they were our equals, our superiors. Murmurs rippled through the nobles. Kael saw fear in their faces now, mixing with the anger. They wanted to merge with us, Orin continued, to dilute our bloodline with their corruption. And when we refused, they tried to take the kingdom by force. Thousands died. Entire packs were slaughtered, The land itself was scorched by their power. That's a lie, Illyra said, but her voice shook. Is it? Saren stepped forward, her good hand resting on her blade. Then explain why the old texts speak of the Lumina as destroyers, why the ancient laws forbid any contact with your kind, why the founders of this kingdom built the containment chambers in the first place. Illyra's face was pale, her hands trembling. Kael could feel her uncertainty bleeding through the bond between them. Even if that's true, Kael said, his voice hard, it doesn't justify what you've done. These people weren't trying to start a war. They were children. Children grow into adults, Orin said coldly. And adults with that kind of power become weapons. We couldn't take that risk. So you buried them alive instead. Kael's grip on his blade tightened. You tortured them. You let them starve in the dark. And you called it protection. We called it necessary. Orin's eyes were like chips of ice. And if you cannot see that, then you are unfit to rule. He raised his hand and the doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Soldiers poured in, not Kael's men, but council enforcers, their armor marked with Orin's personal seal. 50 of them, maybe more, all armed, all moving with the precision of a trained unit. They surrounded Kael, Illyra, and the 3 prisoners, weapons drawn. The nobles scattered, pressing themselves against the walls. Even Gareth and Nyra were forced back, outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Kael's wolf snarled, demanding blood, but he held it back, barely. This is treason, he said quietly. No, Your Grace. Orin's voice was almost pitiful. This is justice. You have been compromised by the anomaly. You freed dangerous criminals. You abandoned your coronation. You brought chaos to this kingdom. And for that, the council has voted to remove you from the throne. You can't do that. We already have. Orin gestured, and one of the enforcers stepped forward holding a scroll. The decree was signed an hour ago. You are hereby stripped of your title and authority, and you will be held in custody until a proper trial can be arranged. Kael's eyes flicked to Illyra. She was surrounded now, enforcers closing in on all sides. Her hands glowed faintly, but he could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her shoulders sagged. She'd used too much power already. If she tried to fight now, she'd burn herself out, and they both knew it. What about her? Kael asked, his voice flat. Orin's smile was cruel. The anomaly will be returned to containment, along with the others, where they belong. No. Illyra's voice was fierce, but Kael could hear the fear beneath it. I'm not going back there. I'd rather die. That can be arranged, Saren said. Kael moved before he could think. He lunged toward Illyra, his blade flashing, but the enforcers were faster. They slammed into him from 3 sides, driving him to his knees. His sword clattered across the floor. Hands gripped his arms, wrenched them behind his back. Kael! Illyra's scream tore through the hall. She raised her hands, light exploding from her palms, but the enforcers were ready. They threw chains around her wrists, chains inscribed with the same runes that had held her in the dungeon. The light sputtered, flickered, died. Illyra collapsed, gasping. The enforcers grabbed her, hauling her to her feet. No! Kael growled, struggling against the hands that held him. Let her go. Let her... A blade pressed against his throat, cold and sharp. He froze. Orin knelt in front of him, his expression almost sympathetic. You could have been a great king, Kael. Strong, ruthless, but you let sentiment cloud your judgment, and sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his robes. Take them to the lower dungeon. Separate cells. And make sure the anomaly is secured. We can't afford any more incidents. The enforcers moved as one, dragging Kael and Illyra toward the doors. Kael twisted, trying to break free, but there were too many of them. He caught one last glimpse of Illyra's face, pale, terrified, her eyes locked on his, before they were pulled in opposite directions. Illyra! Kael! Then the doors slammed shut between them, and she was gone. They threw Kael into a cell 3 levels below the throne room, not as deep as the containment chambers, but deep enough that no sound from the world above could reach him. The walls were solid stone, the door reinforced iron. No windows, no light except the faint glow of a single torch in the corridor outside. Kael paced the cell like a caged animal, his wolf howling in his chest. He could still feel Elira through the bond, distant, muted, but there. She was alive. For now. But for how long? He slammed his fist into the wall, the impact sending shockwaves of pain up his arm. The stone didn't crack. He hit it again, and again, until his knuckles split and blood ran down his fingers. It didn't help. He sank down against the wall, his head in his hands. He'd failed her. He'd promised to protect her, and he'd failed. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning in the dark. Then he heard footsteps. Kale was on his feet in an instant, his body coiled, ready to fight. The footsteps stopped outside his cell. A key turned in the lock. The door swung open. Mira stood there, her face grim. Behind her, two of Kael's personal guards, men he'd fought beside, men he trusted. "Your Grace," Mira said quietly, "we don't have much time." Kael stared at her. "How did you—" "Not all the guards are loyal to Orin," one of the soldiers said. His name was Revan, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw. Word spreading about what the council did, about the prisoners. Some of us don't like it. "How many?" Kael asked. "Enough." Revan's jaw tightened. "But not enough to take the castle. Orin's got the majority of the enforcers on his side, and they're armed to the teeth." Kael's mind raced. "Where's Elira?" Mira's face darkened. "They took her back to the containment level, along with the other three. Orin's planning to make an example of them. Public execution at dawn." Kael's blood ran cold. "We have to get her out." "That's why we're here," Mira said. She pulled a bundle from beneath her cloak and tossed it to Kael. "His sword, his armor. But we need a plan. If we go in blind, we'll all die." Kael strapped on his sword, his mind already working. "How many enforcers are guarding the containment level?" 20, maybe more," Revan said. "And they've got mages with them. Orin's not taking any chances." "Mages?" Kael's eyes narrowed. "Since when does the council have mages?" Mira and Revan exchanged a glance. It was Mira who answered, her voice low. "Since always, Your Grace. They've been hidden for years, trained in secret to counter threats like the Lumina." Kael's stomach twisted. "You're telling me the council's been keeping an army of mages in reserve?" "Not an army. A dozen, maybe. But they're powerful, and they're loyal to Orin." Kael cursed under his breath. This was worse than he thought. If Orin had mages, then a frontal assault was suicide. But he didn't have a choice. "Get me to the containment level," Kael said. "Whatever it takes." Revan nodded. "There's a service passage that runs behind the dungeons. It's narrow, but it'll get us close without being seen." "Then let's move." The service passage was every bit as narrow as Rivon had warned, so tight that Kael had to turn sideways in places, his armor scraping against the stone. Mira led the way, a small glowstone in her hand casting faint blue light. Revan and the other guard brought up the rear, weapons drawn. The passage twisted and turned, descending deeper into the earth. Kael's wolf was on edge, every instinct screaming that they were walking into a trap. But he pushed forward, driven by the bond that pulled him toward Elira like a rope around his chest. Finally, the passage opened into a small alcove overlooking the containment level. Kael peered through a crack in the stone. Below, the corridor was lined with enforcers, armored, armed, and alert. And in the center of the corridor, surrounded by a circle of glowing runes, were 4 figures, Elira and the 3 prisoners. They were chained again, the runes on their restraints glowing brighter than before. Elira's head was bowed, her hair hanging in front of her face. She looked unconscious. Or worse. Kael's hands clenched into fists. "There," Revan whispered, pointing. "The mages." Kael followed his gaze. At the far end of the corridor, 3 robed figures stood in a loose triangle, their hands raised, their mouths moving in silent chant. The air around them shimmered with heat, and the runes on the floor pulsed in time with their words. "They're maintaining a suppression field," Mira said quietly. "As long as that field is active, the Lumina won't be able to use their power." "Then we take out the mages first," Kael said. Revan's face was grim. "Easier said than done. They're protected by enforcers. We'd have to fight through all of them to get close." Kael's mind raced. 20 enforcers, 3 mages, and him with only 2 guards and an old healer. The odds were impossible, but he'd faced impossible odds before. Mira, can you disrupt the suppression field? Mira blinked. What? You're a healer. You work with energy, with life force. Can you interfere with the mage's spell? Mira's eyes widened. Maybe, if I can get close enough. But I'd need a distraction. Kael smiled, sharp and dangerous. I can give you a distraction. He turned to Revan. When I give the signal, you and your man hit them from the left. Draw as many enforcers as you can. Mira, you use the chaos to get to the mages and break their spell. And you, Your Grace? Revan asked. Kael's eyes flicked back to Alira. I'm getting her out. Kael didn't wait for a response. He dropped through the crack in the alcove, landing hard on the stone floor below. The impact sent shockwaves up his legs, but he rolled with it, coming up in a crouch. Every enforcer in the corridor turned to stare at him. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Kael stood, drawing his blade, and smiled. Come on then, he said. Let's make this interesting. The enforcers charged. Kael met them head-on, his blade flashing in the dim light. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, but he didn't care. His wolf was loose now, driving him forward with savage precision. He ducked under a swing, drove his blade through an enforcer's chest, spun and caught another across the throat. Blood sprayed, men screamed, and Revan and his guard hit the enforcers from the side, their blades cutting through the chaos. Mira slipped past the fighting, her small frame weaving through the melee. She reached the mages, her hands glowing with soft green light. One of the mages noticed her. He turned, his hands crackling with energy. And Mira slammed her palm against his chest. The mage convulsed, his spell shattering. The suppression field flickered, wavered. The other two mages turned, their eyes wide. They raised their hands, magic building. And Alira's eyes snapped open. Her entire body erupted with light, blinding, furious, uncontained. The chains around her wrists shattered. The runes on the floor cracked, then exploded, sending shards of stone flying. The mages screamed, their spells backfiring, the energy tearing through them. They collapsed, smoke rising from their robes. Alira rose to her feet, her eyes blazing violet. She looked at the enforcers still fighting Kael and Revan, and she raised her hand. A wave of light slammed into the enforcers, lifting them off their feet and hurling them against the walls. The ones who weren't knocked unconscious scrambled to retreat, their faces white with terror. Kael lowered his blade, his chest heaving. He looked at Alira. She looked back. And in that moment, he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not fear, not uncertainty, power. She turned to the three other prisoners, still chained in the center of the corridor. With a gesture, their restraints shattered. The woman, Kael still didn't know her name, collapsed to her knees, gasping. The boy, Corvin, stared at Alira with something like awe. The third man just wept. Alira knelt beside them, her hands glowing softly. It's okay. You're safe now. Kael moved to her side. We need to go. Orin will send reinforcements. No. Kael blinked. What? Alira stood, her expression hard. We're not running anymore. We're ending this. Now. Alira, they've been hunting us for centuries, Kael. Hunting people like me, locking us away, killing us. And it's not going to stop unless we make it stop. Kael stared at her. What are you saying? I'm saying we go back up there, we face the council, and we show them what happens when you try to bury the truth. Kael's wolf stirred, uneasy. If we go back now, they'll kill us. Maybe. Alira's eyes burned. But at least we'll die fighting. And maybe, just maybe, we'll take enough of them down that the ones who survive think twice before they try this again. Kael wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was suicide. But he looked into her eyes and saw the same fire that had driven him to take the throne in the first place. She wasn't wrong. Running would only delay the inevitable. Orin and the council would hunt them down one by one until there was nothing left. But if they fought, if they made a stand, they could at least make it mean something. Kael nodded slowly. All right, we fight. Alira's expression softened just for a moment. Then she turned to the others. Can you walk? She asked. The woman nodded weakly. Corvin pulled the third man to his feet. Then follow us, Alira said, and stay close. They moved through this castle like a storm. Kael led the way, his blade cutting down any enforcer foolish enough to stand in their path. Alira walked beside him, her power crackling in the air around her. Behind them, Revan and his guard flanked the three prisoners, protecting them from any stragglers. Mira had disappeared somewhere along the way, muttering something about gathering support. Kael hoped she'd succeed, because they were going to need all the help they could get. They reached the throne room to find the doors barred from the inside. Kael didn't hesitate. He slammed his shoulder into the wood once, twice. The door groaned but held. "Move," Alira said. Kael stepped aside. Alira raised her hand and light poured from her palm, concentrated, focused. It struck the door like a battering ram, and the wood exploded inward, shards flying. The throne room beyond was packed. Nobles, council members, enforcers, all of them turned to stare as Kael and Alira stepped through the ruined doorway. Orin stood before the throne, his face pale. Saren was beside him, her blade already drawn. "This is madness," Orin said, his voice shaking. "You're outnumbered, outmatched. Surrender now, and I promise you a quick death." "We don't want your mercy," Alira said. Her voice echoed through the hall, carried by some trick of her power. "We want the truth, and we're going to make sure everyone hears it." She stepped forward, and light radiated from her body. Not violent, not destructive, but revealing. It spread across the throne room, illuminating every shadow, every corner. And as it touched the walls, the ancient runes carved into the stone began to glow. Not just a few, all of them. The entire throne room lit up like the sun, the runes burning with violet fire. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Nobles backed away, their faces white with shock. Because the runes told a story of wolves and Lumina living together, fighting together, ruling together. "This kingdom was built on a partnership," Alira said, her voice ringing through the hall. "Wolves and Lumina, strength and light. That's what the founders intended. That's what the runes say." Orin's face was ashen. "Lies. The girl is manipulating." "The runes don't lie," Kael said. "You know that as well as I do." Saren stepped forward, her blade raised. "It doesn't matter what the founders intended. They were fools, and we corrected their mistake." "By committing genocide." Alira's voice was cold. "By locking children in the dark and letting them die? That's your idea of correction?" Saren's face twisted with rage. "You think you're so righteous, but you don't know what your kind did to us. The cities they burned, the families they slaughtered, the packs they wiped out. Then show me." The words were out before Kael could stop them. Saren blinked, confused. "Show me," Alira repeated. "If you're telling the truth, prove it. Show me the records, the histories, the evidence that my people were the monsters you claim." Saren hesitated. Orin's jaw tightened, and in that hesitation, Kael saw the truth. There was no evidence. There were only stories, legends, propaganda passed down through generations to justify the council's actions. "You can't," Kael said quietly, "because it never happened. Or if it did, it wasn't the way you've been telling it." Orin's face hardened. "It doesn't matter. The decision was made centuries ago, and we stand by it." "Then you're murderers," Alira said. Orin's hand moved to his belt. He pulled out a small vial filled with dark liquid. "If we're murderers," he said coldly, "then we might as well finish the job." He uncorked the vial and threw it at Alira. The liquid hit her chest, and she screamed. It wasn't water. It was something else, something that burned, that ate at her light. Alira collapsed, clawing at her skin, her power flickering wildly. Kael roared, lunging toward Orin, but Saren was faster. She drove her blade toward his chest, and then the entire throne room shook. The floor cracked. The walls groaned. And from the shattered doorway, a figure stepped into the light. Corvin. The boy Kael had freed from the dungeons. He was glowing now, not with violet light like Alira, but with blue. Cold, sharp, furious blue. "Enough," Corvin said, his voice layered with power. He raised his hand and the temperature in the hall plummeted. Ice spread across the floor, up the walls, across the ceiling. The nobles screamed, scrambling away. The enforcers froze, literally, their limbs locked in place by the sudden cold. Saren's blade shattered in her hand, the metal too brittle from the cold. She staggered back, her breath misting in the frozen air. Oren's eyes widened. You thought we were weak, Corvin said. You thought you'd broken us, but you only made us stronger. The woman, the one Kael still didn't know the name of, stepped forward. Her eyes glowed gold, and when she spoke, the ground itself seemed to tremble. We are not your victims anymore. The third man raised his hands, and shadows poured from his palms, living, writhing shadows that coiled around the enforcers, dragging them to the ground. Kyle stared, stunned. The prisoners weren't just survivors. They were weapons, and now they were unleashed. The throne room had become a battlefield of elements. Ice crawled across the marble floors in jagged patterns. Shadows writhed like living serpents around fallen enforcers, and the ground trembled with each step the golden-eyed woman took. The temperature had dropped so fast that frost formed on the nobles' elaborate clothing, their breath coming out in panicked clouds. Kale's first instinct was to protect Alira. She was still on the ground where Oren's poison had struck her, her body convulsing, the light beneath her skin flickering like a dying candle. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her chest, not knowing what to do. Alira, stay with me. Her eyes opened, just a crack. They were still violet, but dimmer now, threaded with veins of black where the poison was spreading. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the chaos erupting around them. Kael. It was barely a whisper. The others, don't let them kill. I won't. He looked up at the three prisoners. No, not prisoners anymore. Warriors. Corvin's hands were outstretched, ice spiraling from his palms and forming a barrier between them and the enforcers. The woman with golden eyes, Kael heard someone shout her name, Lyra, had her feet planted wide, the stone floor cracking in radiating circles around her. And the third, the shadow wielder whose name Kael still didn't know, had wrapped half the remaining guards in darkness so thick they couldn't even scream. They weren't just defending themselves. They were destroying. Stop! Kael's voice cut through the chaos. Stop this now! Corvin's head whipped around, his blue eyes blazing. They tried to kill us. They tried to kill her. I know. Kael stood, keeping himself between the lumina and the terrified nobles pressed against the walls. But if you slaughter them all, you're just proving the council right. You're proving you're the monsters they claimed you were. Maybe we are, Lyra said, her voice resonating like an earthquake. Maybe that's what they made us. No. Elira's voice was weak, but it carried. She'd pushed herself up to her elbows, her face pale and slicked with sweat. No, that's what they tried to make us, but we're not. Corvin's hands trembled, ice still streaming from his fingers. They deserve to die. They deserve to answer, Elira said. There's a difference. The shadow wielder, a lean man with hollow cheeks and eyes like dark water, finally spoke. And what happens when we let them answer? They'll lie. They'll twist the truth. They always do. Then we make sure the truth is undeniable. Kael's eyes locked on Oren, who stood frozen near the throne, his face ashen. The council has been keeping secrets, not just about the Lumina, about everything, and I think it's time everyone heard them. Saren, her shattered blade still clutched uselessly in her hand, laughed bitterly. You think the people will believe you? You, who abandoned his coronation for a girl he barely knows? You, who stands with abominations? They'll believe the evidence. Kael turned to address the nobles cowering against the walls. The council has been lying to you, to all of us, about our history, about the Lumina, about what this kingdom was supposed to be. Lies, Oren spat. The boy speaks lies fed to him by the anomaly. The runes don't lie. Kael gestured to the walls, still glowing with violet fire. Look at them, really look. They tell a story the council tried to erase. A story of wolves and Lumina working together, ruling together, building this kingdom together. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of the nobles were actually looking at the runes now, their expressions shifting from fear to confusion to something that might have been doubt. Lord Fennec, an elderly noble who'd served 3 kings, stepped forward cautiously. Your Grace, if what you say is true, why would the council hide it? Because the truth would have destroyed their power, Elira said. She'd managed to sit up fully now, though Kael could see the effort it cost her. The black veins were still spreading across her skin. The Council's authority has always rested on fear. Fear of outsiders, fear of corruption, fear of anything different. If people knew the Lumina weren't enemies, weren't threats, the Council would lose their justification for everything they've done. Pretty words, Saren said. But words don't change facts. Your kind tried to destroy us once. We made sure it would never happen again. Did they? Kale's voice was sharp. Or is that just another story you've been telling yourselves for so long you've forgotten it's not true? Oren's jaw clenched. We have records, testimonies, evidence from the founding era. Then show them, Kale demanded. Right here, right now. Prove to everyone that what you did was justified. Oren hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. Kale pressed forward. You can't, can you? Because those records don't exist. Or if they do, they don't say what you claim. The records are sealed, Oren said tightly, for the protection of the kingdom. Convenient. Corvin's voice was ice cold. You hide the truth and call it protection. You torture children and call it necessary. You build your power on corpses and call it justice. The temperature dropped another few degrees. Several nobles actually collapsed, their legs giving out from the cold. Kale saw Revan and a few other guards moving to help them, their faces conflicted. Corvin, Elira said softly, ease up, please. The boy's hand shook, but the ice stopped spreading. The temperature stabilized, barely. Kale turned back to Oren. Open the archives. Every sealed record, every hidden testimony, every document the Council has been keeping from the people. Let everyone see the truth. I will not. Ish, you will. Kale's wolf rose to the surface, his eyes flashing silver. Because if you don't, I'll tear this castle apart stone by stone until I find them myself. Oren's face went red. You have no authority to make such demands. You've been removed from the throne. By whose authority? Yours? Kale laughed, harsh and bitter. You needed a king you could control. But I'm not that king. I never was. And the more you try to remove me, the more you prove you're the ones who don't belong here. Fennec spoke up again, his voice trembling. Your Grace, the archives are in the North Tower. The Council keeps them under lock and seal. Lord Fennec, Oren said sharply, you will be silent. Why? Fennec's old eyes were hard. I've served this kingdom for 60 years. I've watched 3 kings rise and fall. And in all that time, I've never seen the Council this desperate to hide something. Maybe it's time we saw what they've been protecting. Other nobles murmured agreement. Not all of them. Many were still pressed against the walls, terrified of the Lumina, but enough. Enough to matter. Oren's composure cracked. You're all fools. She's poisoned your minds. The anomaly has... My name is Elira. She was on her feet now, swaying but upright. The black veins had stopped spreading, though they still marred her skin like cracks in porcelain. And I haven't poisoned anyone. I've just stopped being silent. She took a step toward Oren, then another. Kyle moved to support her, but she waved him off. You kept me in the dark for 13 years, Elira said, her voice growing stronger with each word. You starved me. You studied me like an animal. You told me I was too dangerous to live. But the truth is, you were afraid. Afraid that if people knew what I was, what we all are, they'd realize you've been building your kingdom on a foundation of lies. We built this kingdom on survival, Saren snapped, on the ashes of those your kind murdered. Then prove it, Elira said simply. Show me the names. Show me the bodies. Show me any evidence that the Lumina were the aggressors and not the victims. Saren's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Elira turned to face the crowd, her violet eyes blazing. I don't know what happened 400 years ago. Maybe there was a war. Maybe people died on both sides. But I do know what happened to me. What happened to Corvin, to Lyra, to Thane. She gestured to the Shadow Wielder, and Kael finally had a name for him. We were children. We were innocent. And we were buried alive for the crime of being born different. Her voice broke. How many others are down there? How many more are still chained in the dark, waiting to die? The throne room went silent. Kael had never heard such complete, absolute silence. Even the enforcers, those still conscious and not trapped in ice or shadow, had gone still. They were looking at Elira now, really looking, seeing her not as an anomaly, not as a threat, but as a person who'd been tortured, a child who'd been thrown away. Lord Fennec cleared his throat. Your Grace, if what she says is true, if there are more prisoners— There are, Cale said firmly. We found 3 in the lower dungeons. How many more are there, Orin? How many more have you buried? Orin's face was stone. The containment chambers are sealed for a reason. How many? I will not— Lyra slammed her foot down, and a shockwave rippled through the floor. Cracks spider-webbed across the marble. Nobles screamed. The throne itself shifted, tilting at an angle. Answer him! Lyra roared, her voice making the walls shake. Orin stumbled back, his composure finally shattering. 17 chambers. Are you satisfied? The number hit Kyle like a physical blow. 17. Not counting Lyra and the 3 they'd already freed. 17 people, locked away and forgotten. The nobles were staring at Orin now, horror dawning on their faces. Even some of the enforcers looked shaken. 17, Kyle repeated softly. You've been keeping 17 people in the dark? For how long? Orin's mouth clamped shut. How long? Kale's voice rose to a shout. It was Saren who answered, her voice flat and emotionless. Some for decades. The oldest has been contained for 43 years. 43 years. Kyle felt sick. His wolf howled in rage and grief. Beside him, Alira swayed, her face going even paler. Why? Lord Fennec's voice was barely a whisper. Why would you do this? Because it's necessary, Orin said, but his voice was hollow now. Because the Lumina are dangerous. Because they threaten everything we've built. They're people, Kale said, and you've been torturing them. We've been protecting you, Orin's voice cracked. All of you. Do you think the kingdom would have survived if we'd let them walk free? If we'd let their power corrupt the bloodline? What corruption? Alira's voice was cold. The relic didn't reject me. It transformed. It recognized what you tried to erase. That wolves and Lumina are meant to be together. That's not corruption. That's evolution. It's an abomination, Saren spat. Alira's eyes flashed. No, you're the abomination. You and everyone who thought it was acceptable to bury children alive. She raised her hand, and for a moment Kyle thought she was going to attack. But instead, light poured from her palm. Not violent, not destructive, but healing. It flowed over the black veins, spreading across her skin, burning them away. The poison Orin had thrown dissolved under the radiance, and color returned to Alira's face. She lowered her hand, breathing hard. I'm done being your victim. I'm done hiding, and I'm done letting you decide who gets to live and who gets buried in the dark. She turned to Kyle. Open the chambers. Free them. All of them. Kale nodded. Revan. The guard stepped forward. Your Grace? Take Lyra and Thane. Go to the lower dungeons and free everyone in the containment chambers. I don't care what the council says. I don't care what the law says. Get them out. Revan's face was grim, but he nodded. Yes, Your Grace. He gestured to Lyra and Thane. They followed without hesitation, the 3 of them disappearing through the shattered doorway. Orin took a step forward. You're making a mistake. When those abominations are loose, they'll destroy everything. The kingdom will fall. Then let it fall, Kyle said quietly. Because a kingdom built on torture and lies isn't worth saving. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Then, slowly, Lord Fennec knelt. I stand with the king, he said, his voice clear and strong. Another noble knelt. Then another. One by one, the nobles in the throne room went to their knees. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to shift the balance. Even a few of the enforcers lowered their weapons. Orin stared at them, his face a mask of disbelief. You're all traitors. Every one of you. No, Kael said. We're just done being lied to. Saren let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scream. She turned to Orin. This is your fault. You let the anomaly live. You should have killed her the moment the king freed her. I tried, Orin said bitterly. You saw what happened. Then we try harder. Saren's eyes were wild now, desperate. We can still fix this. We can still— It's over, Saren. Kael's voice was firm. The council is finished. You lost. No. Saren shook her head, backing toward the throne. No, we haven't lost. We still have... She reached into her robes and pulled out another vial, larger this time, filled with the same dark poison she'd used on Elira. Kael's heart stopped. Don't! Theron hurled the vial at the kneeling nobles. Elira moved faster than Kael thought possible. She threw herself in front of the vial, her hands raised. Light poured from her palms, forming a barrier. The vial shattered against the barrier, the poison hissing and bubbling as it tried to eat through the light. But the barrier held. For 3 seconds. 5, 10. Then it shattered. The poison splashed across Elira's chest, her arms, her face. She screamed, collapsing to the floor. The light beneath her skin flickered wildly, fighting the poison, but there was too much of it. Too much. Kael roared, lunging for Saren. His blade flashed, catching her across the shoulder. She fell back, blood streaming from the wound. But Kael didn't care about her anymore. He dropped to his knees beside Elira, his hands hovering over her body, not knowing what to do, how to help. No, 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 his voice cracked. Elira, stay with me. Don't you dare. Her eyes opened, just a crack. The violet was almost gone now, drowned in black. Kael, I'm here, I'm right here. The others... She coughed, blood flecking her lips. Promise me, you'll free them. You're going to free them yourself. You're going to be fine. Promise me. Kael's vision blurred. I promise. Elira smiled just a little. Then her eyes closed, and the light in her chest went out. No! Kael grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. Elira! Elira! She didn't respond. Her body was limp in his arms, her skin going cold. The bond between them, that primal, unbreakable connection, went silent. Empty. Kael threw his head back and howled. It was a sound of pure anguish torn from the depths of his soul. His wolf screamed inside him, clawing to get out, to tear apart everyone who'd done this. Around him, the throne room went deathly silent. Even Saren, bleeding on the floor, stared at him with something like fear. Then Corvin was there, dropping to his knees on Elira's other side. His hands glowed blue, ice forming over his fingers. Move, he said. Kael didn't move. He couldn't. His whole world had just collapsed. Move! Corvin shoved him aside, pressing his freezing hands against Elira's chest. The ice spread across her skin, covering the poison, sealing it in. What are you doing? Kael's voice was hoarse. The poison is eating her from the inside. If I can freeze it, slow it down, maybe... Elira's body convulsed. Her back arched off the floor, her mouth opening in a silent scream, and then light exploded from her chest. Not violet. Not anymore. White. Pure, brilliant, blinding white. It filled the throne room, so bright that everyone had to shield their eyes. Kael felt heat against his face, felt his wolf recoil from the intensity. The light poured into Corvin's ice, melting it instantly. It poured into the poison, burning it away. It poured into Elira herself, flooding her veins, her lungs, her heart. And when the light finally faded, Elira was glowing. Her entire body radiated with that same white light, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. The black veins were gone. The poison was gone. Even the scars on her wrists from years of chains had vanished. Her eyes opened. They were no longer violet. They were silver, pure, shining silver, like molten starlight. She sat up slowly, looking down at her hands in wonder. What happened? You died, Corvin said, his voice shaking. You died, and then you came back. Elira looked at Kael. He was staring at her, his face a mask of shock and relief, and something deeper, something he couldn't name. The bond, he whispered. I felt it die. And then it came back. Elira touched her chest, right over her heart. Stronger. She stood, and as she did, the light radiating from her body intensified. It spread across the floor, up the walls, touching every person in the room. And where it touched, things changed. The wounded enforcer's injuries healed. The frost on the noble's clothing melted away. Even the cracks in the marble floor began to seal themselves. Elira looked around, her silver eyes wide with wonder and fear. I can feel them. All of them. The ones still trapped below. I can feel their pain, their fear. She turned to face the doorway leading to the dungeons. I'm coming for you, all of you, I promise. The light pulsed once more, and Kyle knew, everyone in that room knew, that everything had just changed. Alira wasn't just Illumina anymore. She was something else, something new, something the kingdom had never seen before. And as she walked toward the dungeons, her body blazing with silver light, the nobles parted before her like water. Some knelt, some wept, some just stared in awe. Even Orin, his face pale and drawn, sank to his knees. Because they'd just witnessed a resurrection. And there was no denying it anymore. Elira Voss wasn't an anomaly. She was a revelation. Alira moved through the castle like a comet blazing across a dark sky. The silver light radiating from her body cast long shadows on the stone walls, illuminating corridors that hadn't seen sun in centuries. Kyle followed close behind, his heart still hammering from watching her die and return. The bond between them hummed with an intensity that made his skin prickle. It wasn't just alive anymore. It was singing. Behind them came a procession, nobles who'd knelt, guards who'd laid down their weapons. Even Corvin walked with them, his blue eyes fixed on Alira with something between reverence and fear. Lord Fennec was there too, his old legs struggling to keep pace, but his determination unwavering. They descended into the bowels of the castle, past the dungeons Kyle had already raided, deeper still into levels he'd never known existed. The air grew colder, thicker, until each breath felt like swallowing mud. The walls here were older than the throne room, carved with runes so ancient their meaning had been lost to time. But as Alira passed, those runes began to glow. Silver light traced their shapes, revealing patterns that told stories. Stories of wolves running alongside beings of light, of kingdoms built on cooperation rather than domination, of power shared instead of hoarded. They tried to erase this, Alira said softly, running her fingers along the glowing symbols. But stone remembers longer than men. Kale watched her, still processing what had happened in the throne room. She'd died. He'd felt the bond go silent, felt his soul tear in half. And then she'd come back, transformed into something none of them had words for. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. Alira glanced back at him, her silver eyes unreadable. "Different. Stronger. Like I can hear things I couldn't before, feel things." She paused. "I can sense them. All of them. The ones still trapped below. Their pain is like static in my head, constant, overwhelming. Can you block it out?" "I don't want to." Her jaw tightened. "They've been screaming in the dark for years, decades. The least I can do is listen." They reached a massive iron door at the end of the deepest corridor. It was sealed with 7 locks, each one inscribed with suppression runes that pulsed with sickly green light. Kale could feel the wrongness emanating from beyond it, despair so thick it had weight, pain so old it had calcified into something sharp and cold. 17 chambers, Kyle said, his voice tight. Orin said 17. 18. Alira's hand hovered over the door. He lied about the count. Or maybe he didn't know about the oldest one. She pressed her palm flat against the iron. Silver light poured from her hand, flooding the locks. The suppression runes hissed and smoked, fighting her power. For a moment, nothing happened. The green light flared brighter, pushing back against the silver. Then the locks shattered, all 7 at once, exploding into fragments of metal and dissipating magic. The door swung open on rusted hinges that screamed in protest. Beyond lay a chamber 3 times the size of the throne room, and it was full of cages, not chains, cages. Iron boxes barely large enough for a person to sit upright, stacked in rows like wine in a cellar. Each one glowed faintly with suppression runes, and in each one, Kyle could make out a huddled shape. Merciful. One of the nobles behind them turned and vomited. Several others simply sank to the floor, their faces white with shock. Lord Fennec stared at the cages, his weathered face crumpling. "I served this kingdom for 60 years, he whispered. "How did I not know? How did none of us know?" "Because you weren't meant to," Kyle said, his voice hard. "The council made sure of that." Alira walked forward, her light intensifying until the entire chamber was illuminated in stark silver clarity. Kale counted the cages. 18, just as she'd said. Some of the figures inside were moving, their heads lifting at the sudden light. Others didn't move at all. A young girl, she couldn't have been more than 12, pressed her face against the bars of her cage. Her eyes glowed faint green, and her voice was a croak from disuse. "Are you real?" Alira's face twisted with anguish. "I'm real, and I'm getting you out." She raised both hands, and the light exploded from her palms in a wave that washed over every cage at once. The suppression runes cracked, then shattered. The iron bars bent, twisted, and finally melted, dripping away like water. The prisoners inside spilled out onto the stone floor. Most collapsed immediately, their bodies too weak to stand after years, decades of confinement. But some managed to stay upright, blinking in the light like newborns seeing the sun for the first time. Kael moved among them, his heart breaking with each face he saw. An elderly woman with white hair and eyes that glowed faint amber. A boy younger than Corvin, his skin so pale it was nearly translucent. A man in his 30s whose arms were covered in scars from trying to claw his way through iron. The young girl with green eyes who immediately collapsed into Alira's arms, sobbing. "Get healers," Kael barked at the guards. "Now, and food, water, blankets, everything. I don't care if you have to raid the castle kitchens. These people get whatever they need." The guards scattered. Kael knelt beside the elderly woman, who was staring at him with confusion and fear. "You're safe," he told her. "You're free. No one's going to hurt you anymore." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her throat was too damaged from disuse, from years of screaming that no one heard. Tears streamed down her weathered face, carving tracks through decades of grime. Alira moved from prisoner to prisoner, her hands glowing as she touched each one. Where her light fell, wounds began to heal. Muscles that had atrophied for years regained strength. Voices that had been lost returned, though most could only manage whispers at first. Corvin knelt beside a boy around his own age, helping him sit up. "What's your name?" The boy's eyes, bright orange like fire, focused on Corvin with difficulty. "Dane. How long have I been here?" "How old are you?" 15, I think. Maybe 16 now?" Corvin's jaw clenched. "How old were you when they brought you here?" 7. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. 8 years. This boy had spent more than half his life in a cage barely large enough to lie down in. "Never again," Corvin said, his voice shaking with fury. "This never happens again." But there was one cage that hadn't opened. It sat in the farthest corner of the chamber, larger than the others, and covered in runes so thick they overlapped each other. The suppression field around it was so strong Kael could feel it from across the room, a crushing weight that made breathing difficult. Alira approached it slowly, her expression troubled. The light radiating from her dimmed slightly, as if the cage was somehow draining her power. "This one's different," she said. Kael joined her, peering through the gaps in the runes. Inside, he could just make out a figure. Tall, lean, sitting cross-legged with their head bowed. Unlike the others, this person showed no sign of awareness. No movement. No reaction to the light or the noise or the chaos around them. "Who is it?" Kael asked. "I don't know." Alira pressed her hand against the cage. The runes flared, burning bright green, and she jerked back with a hiss of pain. Smoke rose from her palm where the runes had burned her. "The suppression field is too strong. I can't break it." "Then we find another way." Kael turned to the guards who'd returned with supplies. "Get me tools. Hammers, chisels, anything we can use to crack this open." They worked for an hour, attacking the cage from every angle. Kael swung a hammer until his arms screamed with exhaustion. Corvin tried freezing the metal to make it brittle. Lyra, who'd arrived with the healers, attempted to shake it apart with her earth power, but the iron was reinforced with magic older and stronger than anything they'd encountered, and every blow just made the runes glow brighter. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, Kael stepped back. Blood dripped from his split knuckles, and his shoulders burned. "There has to be a key," he said, "or a release mechanism." "There is." The voice came from behind them. They turned to find Orin standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. His hands were bound in front of him, and his face was haggard. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like despair. "The oldest prisoner," Orin said, his voice hollow. "The first one the council ever contained. The lock on that cage isn't just magical. It's tied to the council's bloodline. Blood magic, woven into the very foundation of the spell. Only a member of the council can open it." Kale's jaw clenched. "Then open it." "I can't." "You mean you won't?" "I mean I can't." Orin's eyes were dull, defeated. "The binding requires unanimous consent from all 7 council members. Their blood, their will, working in concert. And 3 of them are dead." Kale remembered the mages Alira had killed when she broke free. The council's hidden weapons, burned away by her power. "Then we're at an impasse," Kyle said. "No." Alira's voice was quiet but firm. "We're not." She turned back to the cage, her silver eyes blazing with determination. "If the lock is tied to bloodline, then I'll break the bloodline." "Alira, you tried." "Not like that." She placed both hands on the cage, and the light pouring from her intensified until it was almost painful to look at. The temperature in the chamber rose, the air shimmering with heat and power. The council built their power on suppression, on control, on forcing people like me to be less than we are. But I'm not less anymore. I'm not diminished. I'm not contained. The runes on the cage began to crack, hairline fractures spreading across the iron like spiderwebs. And I refused to let anyone else be buried in the dark. The light exploded. Not outward, but inward, pouring into the cage itself. The runes shattered, the iron screamed, and the entire structure collapsed inward, imploding into dust and light. The force of it knocked everyone back a step, and Kyle had to shield his eyes against the intensity. When the brightness faded, the figure inside was revealed. It was a woman, tall and regal, with silver hair that fell to her waist and eyes that glowed with the same silver light as Alira's. She was dressed in tattered robes that had once been fine, embroidered with patterns that matched the ancient runes on the walls. Her skin bore the scars of decades in captivity, marks from chains, from suppression magic, from sheer endurance. But when she stood, she moved with the grace of a dancer, the strength of a warrior. She looked at Alira, and her lips curved into a sad smile. "Hello, little one," she said, her voice like wind through bells. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you." Alira stared at her, shock written across her face. "Who are you?" "My name is Eris." The woman's eyes shifted to take in the freed prisoners, the ruined cages, the stunned nobles. "And I am the reason the council started hunting our kind in the first place." They brought Eris to the surface, along with the other freed prisoners. The castle had transformed into a makeshift hospital. Mira and her healers worked through the night, tending to the broken bodies and shattered minds. Many of the prisoners couldn't speak, couldn't process what had happened. They simply sat in the warm rooms Kyle had cleared for them, staring at walls they could actually see, eating food they could actually taste, touching sunlight streaming through windows with trembling hands. The young girl with green eyes, her name was Scylla, wouldn't let go of Alira. She clung to her like a drowning person to driftwood, and Alira didn't have the heart to pull away. So she sat with the child in her lap, stroking her hair, whispering that she was safe, that no one would hurt her ever again. But Eris was different. She was weak. 43 years in a cage had taken their toll. But her mind was sharp, her memories intact, and what she remembered changed everything. She sat in Kyle's private study, wrapped in warm furs, sipping broth that Mira had prepared. Kyle and Alira sat across from her, while Corvin, Lyra, and Thane stood guard at the door. Outside, the castle was in chaos. The council had been arrested, the nobles were demanding answers, and rumors of what had happened in the throne room were spreading through the city like wildfire. But in this moment, in this room, there was only the truth. 400 years ago, Eris began, her voice steady despite her weakened state. There was no war between wolves and Lumina. That's a lie the council invented to justify what they did. Kyle leaned forward. Then what really happened? A partnership. Eris's eyes grew distant, remembering. The Lumina and the wolves had lived together for centuries. We complemented each other perfectly. The wolves provided strength, protection, ferocity in battle. We provided healing, light, magic that could mend both body and land. Together, We built this kingdom into something beautiful, something that could have lasted forever. Then what went wrong? Illyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Greed. Eris's voice hardened. A faction within the wolf leadership wanted more power. They saw the Lumina as competition, as a threat to their dominance. We had no interest in ruling, that was never our way, but we had influence. The people loved us, trusted us, and that made certain wolves uncomfortable. She took a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the cup of broth. So they fabricated evidence of a Lumina plot to overthrow the throne. They staged attacks on wolf settlements and blamed them on our people. They created the narrative of a war that never existed, building it piece by piece until even good people believed the lies. And the king believed them? Kael asked. The king was weak. Eris's eyes flashed with old anger. King Aldrich III. He wanted peace, wanted to avoid conflict at all costs. So when his advisors brought him proof of Lumina aggression, forged documents, paid witnesses, staged crime scenes, he sided with the wolves. He ordered the Lumina expelled from the kingdom within a fortnight. She paused, taking a shaky breath. But expulsion wasn't enough for the council. They wanted to make sure the Lumina could never return, could never challenge wolf supremacy again. So they began hunting us, systematically, ruthlessly. They killed the adults, said they were too dangerous to live, and imprisoned the children, claiming they were being contained for the kingdom's safety. For rehabilitation. You were one of those children, Illyra said softly. I was the first. Eris looked down at her hands, scarred and trembling. I was 17 when they took me. I'd been training to become a healer, learning to use my light to mend wounds, to ease pain, to help crops grow in barren soil. They locked me in that cage and told me I'd die there, that my power was too dangerous, too corrupting, too great a threat to the purity of the kingdom. 43 years, Kael said, his voice tight with rage. They kept you there for 43 years. They kept me there as a warning, as proof of what happens to those who threaten the council's power. Eris's eyes met his. But they made a mistake. They thought isolation would break me, would make me forget who I was. Instead, it gave me time to learn, to grow, to understand my power in ways they never imagined. She raised her hand and silver light bloomed there. Not wild, not chaotic, but controlled with a precision that made even Illyra's power look crude by comparison. The light formed shapes, images, memories pulled from Eris's mind and made visible. They saw the world as it had been. Wolves and Lumina working side by side in fields, children of both kinds playing together. A council chamber where wolf and Lumina representatives sat as equals, making decisions together. A kingdom thriving under shared leadership. Then the images darkened. The fabricated attacks, the false evidence, the king's proclamation, and finally, the purge. Lumina hunted through the streets, their children torn from their arms, their homes burned. When the images faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. I'm the strongest Lumina ever born, Eris said quietly. That's why they never let me out. They knew if I ever escaped, I could dismantle everything they'd built, every lie, every manipulation, every carefully constructed narrative. Kael's wolf stirred, wary. And now that you're free, Eris looked at him and her expression softened. Now that I'm free, I'm going to help you rebuild. Because that's what Lumina do. We don't destroy. We heal. We mend what's broken and help it grow stronger. She turned to Illyra. You've already started the work. You broke the suppression, freed the prisoners, exposed the truth. But there's more to do. The damage runs deep, child. Deeper than you know. 4 centuries of lies don't disappear overnight. Tell me how to fix it, Illyra said. You can't, not alone. Eris gestured to the window, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. This kingdom has been built on lies for 400 years. Changing it will take time, patience, and more courage than any one person can muster. She looked at Kael. You're the king. The people will follow you, at least for now. But you have to give them a reason to believe in something new, to trust that change won't destroy them. Kael stood, moving to the window. The city below was waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, people beginning their daily routines. They didn't know yet. Didn't know their entire history had been rewritten overnight. Didn't know that everything they'd been taught about the Lumina was a lie. "What do you propose?" he asked. "A new order." Eris's voice was strong despite her weakened body. "Not Wolf or Lumina, but both. A council that represents all people, not just the powerful. Laws that protect the vulnerable, not exploit them. A kingdom built on truth, not fear." "The nobles will never accept it," Kael said. "They'll see it as a threat to their power." "Then show them it's not." Illyra stood, joining him at the window. "Show them that cooperation makes us stronger, not weaker. That diversity is a strength, not a corruption." Kael looked at her, this woman who'd been buried alive and had clawed her way back to the light, who died protecting others and had returned more powerful than ever, who stood beside him now, not as a victim, but as an equal and a partner. "You make it sound simple," he said. "It's not." Illyra's smile was small, but genuine. "It's going to be the hardest thing either of us has ever done. Harder than fighting the council, harder than breaking the cages, because we're not just changing laws, we're changing minds, hearts, centuries of fear and prejudice." She took his hand, the bond between them humming with shared determination. "But it's also the only thing worth doing." Kael nodded slowly. Then he turned to face the others in the room. "Spread the word," he said. "At noon today, I'm calling a full assembly. Every noble, every guard, every citizen who can fit in the throne room and the courtyard beyond. It's time they heard the truth. All of it." By noon, the throne room was packed beyond capacity, and the crowd spilled out into the courtyard where hastily erected platforms had been set up so people could see and hear. Nobles stood shoulder to shoulder with commoners. Guards mixed with freed prisoners, some of whom were strong enough now to stand on their own. Illyra had used her power to heal most of the structural damage from the previous night's battle, but scorch marks still marred the walls, and the air still smelled of smoke and magic. Kael stood before the throne, not on it, but in front of it, at the same level as everyone else. Illyra stood beside him, her silver light dimmed to a soft glow so as not to blind the crowd. Eris was there too, seated in a chair because she was still too weak to stand for long, but present, visible. A living reminder of what the council had done. The crowd murmured and shifted, uncertainty thick in the air. Many had heard rumors, some had seen the freed prisoners being brought up from the dungeons, but most were still confused, still waiting for answers. Kael raised his hand, and silence fell. 400 years ago, he began, his voice carrying through the hall and out to the courtyard beyond. "This kingdom was built on a lie. You've been told that the Lumina were enemies, aggressors, threats to be contained and controlled. You've been told that the council's actions were necessary, justified, for your protection." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It was all false." The murmuring grew louder. Kael pressed on. "The Lumina were never our enemies. They were our partners, our allies. Together, Wolves and Lumina built this kingdom. And when a faction within our leadership decided they wanted soul power, they fabricated a war to justify destroying the Lumina completely." He gestured to Eris, to the other freed prisoners standing nearby. "These people you see before you, they're not criminals, they're not threats, they're survivors. Children who were buried alive for the crime of being born different. People who spent decades in the dark because the council decided they were inconvenient, dangerous, corrupt." His voice hardened. "I've seen the cages. I've walked through the chambers where they were kept. And I can tell you, what was done to them wasn't justice. It wasn't protection. It was torture, systematic, deliberate, sanctioned by the very people you trusted to keep you safe." Lord Fennec stepped forward from the crowd. "Your Grace, if what you say is true, why should we believe you? How do we know this isn't another deception, another manipulation?" It was a fair question, and Kael respected him for asking it publicly. "Because I can prove it." Kael nodded to Illyra. She raised her hand and silver light poured from her palm. But instead of attacking or defending, the light wove itself into shapes. Images pulled from the ancient runes on the walls, from the memories Eris had shared, from the truth the council had tried to erase. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the light showed them history. Real history. Wolves and Lumina working side by side, building cities, raising families, sharing power. Lumina healers saving wolf children from plague. Wolf warriors defending luminous settlements from raiders. A kingdom where both kinds thrive together. Then the council's betrayal. The fabricated evidence. They could see it now. See the lies being constructed. The staged attacks. The paid witnesses. The false documents. The systematic genocide disguised as protection. When the images faded, there wasn't a single person in the crowd whose face wasn't stricken with horror or shame or disbelief. The council is guilty, Kyle said quietly into the ringing silence. Guilty of murder. Guilty of torture. Guilty of treason against the very foundation this kingdom was built upon. Guilty of building 4 centuries of power on the corpses of innocents. He drew his blade and drove it point first into the stone floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the hall. And I will not let it continue. He pulled the blade free and held it high. I claim the throne not as a wolf king, but as king of all people. Wolf and Lumina, noble and commoner. Anyone who calls this kingdom home has a voice, has rights, has protection under my rule. And my first decree is this: the old council is dissolved. Their authority, their laws, their suppression, all of it ends today. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some nobles looked outraged. Others looked relieved. The commoners were a mix of confusion and cautious hope. In its place, Kyle continued, I'm establishing a new council, one that represents everyone. Wolf and Lumina will sit side by side. Nobles and commoners will have equal voice. And no one will ever be imprisoned for the crime of being different again. Saren's voice cut through the hall, raw and furious. She was being held by guards near the back, her wounded shoulder bandaged, but her eyes still blazing with hatred and desperation. You're destroying everything, she screamed. You're letting corruption into the kingdom. You're undoing centuries of careful protection, of survival. When this fails, and it will fail, the blood will be on your hands. I'm choosing truth over lies, Kyle said flatly. And if you can't accept that, you're welcome to leave. The borders are open. Anyone who wants to cling to the old ways can go. I won't stop you. He looked out over the crowd, his expression softening slightly. But I'm asking you to stay, all of you. I'm asking you to be braver than your ancestors, to choose hope over fear, to choose truth over comfortable lies, to choose the future over the past. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the assembly. I won't force you. I won't threaten you. But I'm asking you, begging you, to give this a chance, to see that the Lumina aren't monsters. They're people, just like us. And together, we can build something better than what we had, something worthy of the kingdom our ancestors tried to create before fear poisoned it. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Lord Fennec knelt. I choose the future, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I choose truth, and I choose to trust my king. One by one, the nobles followed. Not all of them. Some turned and walked out, their faces hard with disgust and fear. But more than Kyle had dared hope knelt, placing their trust in this new vision. Their fists over their hearts in the old salute, the commoners followed, then the guards, and finally, haltingly, the freed prisoners themselves, tears streaming down their faces as they realized what was happening. When Illyra knelt beside Kyle, her silver eyes shining with unshed tears, the last of his doubt dissolved. This was real. This was happening. They were changing the world. The weeks that followed were chaos of a different kind. The old council members were tried publicly, their crimes laid bare for all to see. Orin was stripped of his titles, his lands, his wealth. He was exiled to the far northern territories with nothing but the clothes on his back and a warning that if he ever returned, he'd face execution. Saren, who'd fought to the end, who tried to poison Illyra even after everything was revealed, was imprisoned, not buried in the dark, but held in a cell with windows and light and regular meals. Treated humanely despite her crimes, because Kyle had meant what he said about ending the cycle of cruelty. The other surviving council members faced similar fates. Some went quietly, accepting their punishment. Others raged and cursed until the end. The containment chambers were destroyed. Every cage, every chain, every suppression rune, all of it reduced to rubble and dust. The iron was melted down and forged into something new. A monument in the castle courtyard. A sculpture of a wolf and a lumina standing back to back, supporting each other. A reminder of what had been endured and what would never be allowed again. The new council was formed slowly, carefully. Eris took her place as the first Lumina representative, her wisdom and patience tempering the fiercer voices. Corvin, Lyra, and Thane joined as well, their experiences giving them unique perspectives on justice and mercy and the importance of protecting the vulnerable. Lord Fennec became Kael's chief advisor, using his decades of experience to navigate the complex politics of change. Commoners were elected from each district, their voices finally heard after centuries of silence. And slowly, gradually, the kingdom began to heal. It wasn't easy. There were riots in some cities, protests from nobles who'd lost their power and privilege. There were assassination attempts, 3 in the first month alone, all thwarted by a combination of Kael's guards and Alira's protective magic. There were moments when Kael wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, if the kingdom would tear itself apart before it could come together. Nights when he lay awake, plagued by doubt, questioning every decision. But every time despair crept in, he'd look at Elira, at the woman who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd died and come back stronger, who stood beside him as an equal and a partner, and he'd find the strength to keep going. And she'd look back at him with those silver eyes and say, "One more day. We just have to make it one more day. Then one more after that." So they did. 6 months after the revelation, Kael and Elira stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. Below, the streets were alive with activity. Wolves and Lumina walking side by side, children playing without fear, merchants calling out wares in a dozen different languages. A Lumina healer had opened a clinic in the lower district, treating anyone who needed help regardless of their ability to pay. A wolf craftsman had taken on 3 Lumina apprentices, teaching them the old metalworking techniques. Mixed marriages were becoming common, no longer forbidden or frowned upon. The kingdom was transforming, one small choice at a time. "We did it," Elira said softly, leaning against the balcony railing. "We actually did it." Kyle took her hand, the bond between them humming with contentment. "You did it. I just followed your lead." Elira laughed, the sound light and free in a way it had never been when he first found her. "Liar. But I'll let you believe that if it makes you happy." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their kingdom, come alive with possibility. Scylla, the young girl with green eyes, was playing in the courtyard below with other children, both wolf and Lumina. Her laughter rang out, clear and joyful. "Do you ever think about going back?" Kael asked. "To before all this, when life was simpler." Elira was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she shook her head. "No, because simple isn't the same as good. And this," she gestured to the city, to the people, to everything they'd built together. "This is good. Hard, messy, complicated good. But good." Kael pulled her close, and she leaned into him, her light warming them both against the evening chill. "What do you think happens next?" she asked. "I don't know." Kael's voice was honest, vulnerable in a way he only allowed himself to be with her. "I'm making this up as I go." "Good." Elira smiled against his chest. "Because I am too. And I think that's okay. We'll figure it out together." "Together," Kael agreed. Eris appeared in the doorway behind them, stronger now after months of healing and proper food. "Your Majesties, the evening council session is about to begin." Kael groaned. "Can't we skip just this once?" "You're the one who instituted daily council sessions," Eris said with a knowing smile. "Transparency, you said. Accountability." "I'm regretting that decision," Kael muttered, but he was smiling. They followed Eris inside to the council chamber where representatives from across the kingdom waited, where decisions were made not in secret, but in the open, where every voice mattered. It was exhausting. It was frustrating. It required patience and compromise and endless discussion, but it was also right. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in silver twilight, Kael and Elira took their seats side by side. Two people who'd been broken by the darkness and had chosen to become the light. The kingdom they'd inherited had been built on lies and fear. The kingdom they were building would be founded on truth and hope. It wouldn't be perfect. Nothing ever was. There would be setbacks and failures and moments of doubt, but it would be real. And that was enough. Years later, when historians wrote about this moment, they'd call it the reckoning, the day the old order fell and a new one rose from the ashes. They'd write about King Cale Draven, who'd risked everything to do what was right. About Alira Voss, the Lumina who'd survived the unsurvivable and had rewritten the rules of power itself. About Eris, the elder who'd endured 43 years in darkness and had emerged with wisdom instead of vengeance. They'd write about the Monument of Unity in the castle courtyard, where people came from across the kingdom to remember what had been lost and to celebrate what had been found. They'd write about the new council, where Wolf and Lumina and Human all had equal say in the kingdom's future. They'd write about the schools that opened, teaching children the real history, not the sanitized lies of the past. But those who'd lived through it knew the truth was simpler and more profound than any history book could capture. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic revelations. It was about a girl who'd been buried alive and had refused to die, and a king who'd heard her screaming in the dark and had chosen to listen. Everything else, the revolution, the reform, the rebuilding, had simply followed from that one choice: to see the buried, to free the forgotten, to choose compassion over convenience, truth over tradition, hope over fear. That was the real story. And it was just beginning. Because in the castle nursery, a child had just been born, the first child of a wolf and a Lumina in 400 years. She had her mother's silver eyes and her father's dark hair, and when she cried, light and shadow both danced across the walls. They named her Hope, and the kingdom celebrated.